Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode of how to put a robot in your films using Blender. If you haven't watched the first episode yet, I'd recommend starting there and then working your way through in chronological order. If you watched the first one and found it quite complicated, then fear not, because that was the most difficult step, so it gets a lot easier from there. Adding the bones is quite an advanced technique, whereas things like texturing and rendering are a lot more simple. This video is going to be focusing on adding some block textures so we know what part of the mesh we want to colour, and then once that's done we'll be going in and changing those block textures to be nice photorealistic materials. So first things first, come over to the materials tab so that we can edit some of our materials. When you download an OBJ from the internet, quite often it will be textured, so the colours will be automatically assigned to various areas of the mesh. However, they won't actually have a colour, so they'll just be a default grey. So it's our job to go in and choose what those colours are and what they're going to look like. So the first thing I did for each of these materials is change the viewport colour to be a really nice vibrant colour like blue, orange, green, pink. And I made sure that each of them are very different colours, so it's going to be really clear what part of the model is going to be a different material. Next, you can decide if there's any parts of the model you don't want to be the default colours. So for example here, I decided I wanted the eyes of the robot to glow. So I press tab to go into edit mode, I press control tab which allows you to select vertice, edge or face mode, and I selected faces, and then I press C and use circle select to click and drag over the areas that I wanted to change the colour of. Once you've done that, you want to go back under the settings and click the plus to add a new material. You can name it whatever you want it to be, and then you press assign which attaches that material to the faces you have selected. Next, to make the eyes glow, I changed the surface from diffuse BDSF to emission, which means it's a light, and then I set the strength to about 4 and changed the colour to be a slight blue colour. Now when I render this, the eyes will be a light source and it will look like they have a light bulb or something inside them. Now we're going to replace those very base colours that we made with some photorealistic metal materials. I got all of the materials in this video from a website called textures.com. It's really good and you'll see why in a second. All of these materials that are displayed as spheres are actually a combination of lots of images that you can combine together to make a really photorealistic looking material. In each of these you'll have a diffuse, sometimes called the albedo, which is essentially the flat colour of your texture. We don't use the height map for this, but we will be using the metallic, the normal map and the roughness. These images, when you plug them into Blender, tell the material how it should display things like how shiny a surface is, how reflective it should be, if it should have any bumps or scrapes on the surface of the material, and all sorts of stuff like that. I just searched for metal and you can see there's all sorts of different types of metal you can go for. There's aged metal that has a lot of rust on it, or there's new metal that has a sort of brushed look to it which looks really nice. There's loads of options. This yellow one is one of the other materials that I used, and this particular texture also has a mask image. This is so that as well as the top layer of yellow, you can also control the scratches that are shown through beneath by using the mask. To download them you just have to create an account, and then you can download the small or medium sized textures for free just by clicking on them. So, now back in Blender we can start texturing. First of all we want to open a new window with a node editor in it, so click these 3 little lines in the top right corner and drag them out into the middle of the screen. In Blender the default material is a diffuse BDSF. We want to delete this by pressing X and then press Shift A and go down to shader and add a principled shader instead and connect the BDSF to the surface output. Once that's done, I set the base colour of our principled shader to be the same colour as the default material that we set, so that when I press Shift Z to go into rendered view they'll still be the same colour, which makes it a lot easier to see what's what. Now we're ready to start bringing in the textures we downloaded. Press Shift A and go to texture and then click on image texture. Then open it up and navigate to the files that you downloaded. You want to open all 4 of these textures. Blender won't let you open them all at the same time, so just do them individually. The first one we'll connect is the diffuse, or the albedo. This is the most simple one. You just want to plug it into your base colour, and this will determine the flat colour of the material. Now that's done, I press Shift D to duplicate the image texture, and then click the folder, which allows you to open another file from the same folder, and then I open the metallic. Anything that isn't the diffuse texture you want to set to non-colour data instead of colour, so the only one that wants to be colour is the top texture. Then you simply plug the colour output into the metallic input on your principled shader. With the image texture still selected, press Shift D to duplicate this as well, then go back into the file system and open the roughness image. You want to plug the roughness image into the roughness input on the principled shader. It's very simple. And then lastly you want to duplicate this one more time and open up your normal map material. Normal maps need one extra node before plugging it into the principled shader, so press Shift A, go down to vector and then click normal map. You want to plug the colour output into the colour input on the normal map and then output the normal into your principled shader. Blender's quite helpful in that the dots will be the same colour you want to connect them to most of the time, so for example green to green, purple to purple. To really see what this material looks like, we need an environment texture to light it properly. If you go to Google Images and search for HDRI, you'll find absolutely loads. I just used one of a studio because it's fairly even lighting and looks quite good, but you can choose pretty much anything you like. You want to save this image to your desktop or somewhere that you'll remember it, and then bring it into Blender. Back in Blender, come over to the World tab, and then under Surface, you want to check Use Nodes. Then by colour, click the red dot and change it to Environment Texture. From here you can open up the image you saved. Blender will then use that photo and wrap it around your entire scene like a big sphere, and then the brighter parts of the image will be used as a light source which will light your model. To see this working, press Shift Z to go into rendered mode. As you can see, the material has some really nice reflections, and the normal map is making all of those really cool cracks and divots in the material, which makes it look like it's more 3D. If you want to emphasize those divots and cracks more, you can change the strength of the normal map in the normal map node. The higher the number, the more exaggerated the effect will be. Now we need to do the rest of the materials. One way to save a bit of time is to press B, click and drag over the 4 image textures in the normal map, and then you can copy and paste them into the next material, so you don't have to keep adding them every time. Now you need to go through and click the little folder icon on each of the image textures, and tell Blender where the new image texture you want to open is. You'll have to do this for all 4. Now to use the mask image that I was talking about for the scratches, you want to create a second texture that's going to show through underneath the paint. For this I wanted the yellow paint to come out on top, and then have a shiny surface that's quite metallic coming through underneath. So I made a new principled shader and just set it to a grey colour, and then I turned the metallic slider all the way up and the roughness slider all the way down to make it a chrome colour. Next I duplicated one of the image textures and opened the mask texture inside it. Then you want to create a mix node and plug both of the principled shaders into it. I did it with a shortcut that's not enabled in Blender by default, but you can do this just by pressing Shift A and then searching for a mix shader. Then what you want to do is plug the colour of the mask image into the factor of the mix shader. This will tell Blender to use one of the principled shaders for the white parts of the image, and then the black parts will be the other principled shader. And this is how you can get the scratches to show through under your first material. I tweaked the base colour for the scratches material slightly and made it a bit darker so the scratches showed up more. Then it's just rinse and repeat. Go through and do this for the rest of your materials until your entire model is textured. One last thing I thought I'd show is that I didn't really like the colour or the contrast of this bronze texture. So I pressed Shift A and then searched for RGB curves, and then what you can do here is add some contrast into the texture. I started by making the diffuse texture a lot darker, which helped a lot. And then I added a brightness and contrast node to the metallic and roughness images. I cranked up the contrast a little bit, which gave me a lot more detail and variation in the texture. And you can see here it makes the black scratches and things stand out a lot more, and it adds a lot of dimension to the texture, which I liked a lot. So if you don't like your textures, sometimes you can have a play around with them and add some contrast or saturation, and just see if you can make it work and look nicer. That's everything I'm going to cover in this video. Thank you very much for watching, and remember to come back tomorrow for the video on animation.